Welcome into the Talkin Tide podcast. I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News, joined by Travis Reier. We are here to preview this Alabama-LSU game for the next little while here on a Thursday evening. Of course, the Talkin Tide podcast and a whole lot of other really fine content can be found on Reier on YouTube. Check out that channel. Give it a like. Subscribe. You'll like everything Travis produces there, I promise you. Pops on Point will show up there here once in a while on Reier on YouTube. That's always a favorite feature of mine, and, of course, Talkin Tide as well. Travis, Alabama, roughly 48 hours away from kicking off in Baton Rouge against the Tigers. Both teams coming in 6-2 on the season. LSU with only one conference loss, Alabama with two, but nevertheless with two overall losses on both sides. This is a season breaker for somebody, at least where the CFP is concerned, right?
You got to think so. Absolutely. If you lose a third game, it's going to be extremely difficult, one would think, to qualify for that initial 12-team field. So absolutely. And when you think about first-year Alabama head coaches in this series. Now, this series largely belongs to Alabama. But you think about Nick Saban, his first year as Alabama head coach, lost to LSU. Think about Mike Shula, first year as his head coach at Alabama, loss to LSU. You go back to Dennis Franchione, loss to LSU. Mike DuBose, loss to LSU in his first year. So some things that Kalen DeBoer is trying to snap right here. That type of streak. And then also trying to snap a two-game road losing streak. Something we haven't seen much from Alabama in recent years.
Nope. L to Vanderbilt, L against Tennessee last couple times out on the road. I wrote a column earlier this week that Jalen Milroe really in his career doesn't have what anybody would call a marquee road win. Obviously beat Georgia on a neutral field and a pretty fine performance in Atlanta for the SEC championship game last year. But the tough – and look, you can only play the schedule in front of you, right? I mean, the road schedule last year for Alabama wasn't that tough, right? So that's part of it too. It's not like he's tried and failed a whole lot on the road against good teams. But to me, the best team he's faced on the road in his career to date was Tennessee in Knoxville just a few weeks ago. And he struggled in that one. This is one he can't struggle.
No, he can't. And this is one of those, as you kind of alluded to there, these are legacy type of games if you're a quarterback at Alabama. He's 2-0 against Georgia. That should stand up pretty well in its own right. For me, it does. Even though Auburn wasn't good at all last season, to win in the manner in which Alabama won, and he was the guy throwing the pass on 4th and goal from the 31, that'll be memorable in a lot of ways. But, championships, big stages, that's what you establish your legacy on as a quarterback at Alabama. And so for Jalen, it's a big opportunity on Saturday night.
No doubt about it. Really big one for both quarterbacks. Garrett Nussmeier of LSU as well, of course, the son of Doug Nussmeier, who was fairly briefly an offensive coordinator under Nick Saban at Alabama. Matter of fact, I got to know Garrett just a little bit when he was a kid here in Tuscaloosa. I actually went to school with one of my daughters.
Holy Spirit Titan. A Holy Spirit Titan at one time, Garrett Nussmeier. Yeah.
Kind of crazy to see the way he's developed, and really, it's almost a little bit of a Mac Jones story for him in terms of waiting his turn, right? At LSU a long time, pretty large body of work as a backup, right? The last few years, played a lot of football, even though he didn't start a whole lot at all. But this year, finally got the reins, just kind of like Mac Jones did in his final year, and he's been a little bit up and down. I think he's played pretty well overall. But the issue with Nussmeier is that he will throw it to the wrong team here and there. And obviously that can be costly. Jalen Milroe can do that too. So really with both of these quarterbacks, interceptions could tell the tale if one throws them and the other doesn't.
Yeah, it was a disastrous, really second half for both these quarterbacks the last time we saw them. right? It wasn't good enough for Jalen in Knoxville. Well, not the last time, but the last time we saw him on the road anyway. I mean, the last time we saw Jalen against Missouri, things went a lot better in the second half of that game. But
Yeah.
kind of the same thing with Nuss. That second half at Texas A&M, too many turnovers. Nussmeier to me is sort of like discount Matthew Stafford. He's a gunslinger. He doesn't have any problem letting it rip from the pocket, and he'll make some throws that will really leave you kind of gasping a little bit. But then the same type of gasp you'll have when he makes some of the decisions and turnovers that he's had issues with. I like Nussmeier because I like the way that guy's wired. He's a tough guy. Again, he might throw a pick, but he's going to keep coming back at you. So I think that's why it's even more important Saturday night if Alabama, again, kind of like Tennessee on the road, had some opportunities in that game to maybe take more control of the situation in the first two quarters, wasn't able to do it. That Tennessee defense, though, you have to give a lot of credit to. That's one of the better defenses in all of college football. I don't think that's what Jalen's going up against on Saturday night with this LSU defense. Although I do think it's improved in year one under Blake Baker. Still got some ground to cover.
Still got some ground to cover. I think one difference, too, of course, Garrett Nussmeier, not the most fleet of foot. I think he's a better athlete than people probably give him credit for, but he doesn't tuck it a lot. He doesn't try to hurt you with his feet a whole lot. And so from a defensive standpoint, you can pretty much assume that Milroe's going to be spied on pretty much every time Milroe suits up. There's going to be a spy watching him. Alabama maybe doesn't have to make that commitment defensively, Travis.
I don't think so. You know where pretty much Garrett Nussmeier is going to be. As you said, this is a guy that isn't a redwood in the pocket, but he damn sure isn't Jaden Daniels either. Which,
no.
Boy, you think about the potential for that game a year ago in Tuscaloosa if Daniels is able to stay in it. And then what Jalen Milroe did with his legs. You're not going to have those sort of two-way guys for both teams this time around. But you do have capable receivers for this LSU team, Kyron Lacey. What about Aaron Anders? Yeah, I mean, the situation there with the former Alabama wide receiver, and what he can present to you and the problems he can present to you as well. We're going to talk about all that, and really for Alabama too, with Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard and, the weapons that Jalen has to throw to. But the run game might very well end up being the determining factor between these backs for both these teams. The offensive lines for these teams are both considered to be among the best in college football. So what they can get out of it on those from those guys on the offensive side, that's where Jalen might be the X factor again, though. Really ripped LSU with his legs a year ago. Maybe not to that extent does he do it again, but perhaps in some big moments he does it Saturday night.
Yeah, both of these quarterbacks, I think they both need running games. Milroe maybe a little bit less so because he can hit you with the explosives running or throwing. But running games, especially with Alabama being on the road in a noisy environment, it's really, a false start is all it takes to be sitting in a 3rd and 9 on the road and not be able to hear.
It's like Tennessee.
Yeah. We saw Milroe against Tennessee especially, and probably not only against Tennessee, but when he was trying to make a couple checks against the Vols with all that noise in the second half, Travis, he wasn't yelling. He was just walking right up to the right tackle and put it right in his ear hole. Then he walked over to the left tackle, put it right in Proctor's ear hole, handle it that way, right?
And then you end up, though, taking some big penalties, I think, in large part because of communication issues, like a delay of game. You can't plead ignorance after the trip to Knoxville with the new staff on the offensive side of the ball. You got that experience under your belt. You witnessed it firsthand. You experienced it firsthand. So how do you now adjust for what you're going to experience on Saturday night in Baton Rouge? Maybe more in the way of hand signals, going silent, doing some different things like that. That'll be an interesting aspect of this to watch, to see exactly what specifically this coaching staff was able to take offensively from that experience at Neyland and apply it moving towards this game.
Pass protection going to be huge for Alabama, obviously, again in this game. It is every week, but Braden Swinson and Savion Jones couple of defensive ends for LSU having nice years, Travis. They've got 12 and a half sacks between them. Swenson's got 8 of them. And Alabama's pass protection has been a little up and down, better than it was a year ago. It was a disaster a year ago. At least it was for the first 7 games or so. This year it's been improved, no question about it, but still leaky at times. Milrose got to get rid of the ball sometimes too. That's a factor as well. But these defensive ends for LSU get after it, and Alabama very much needs strong play from Proctor and Pritchett on both edges.
Yeah, and the last time we saw those guys, they both gave up blow-bys really to Johnny Walker of Missouri in the game leading up to the bye week. So you're right, got to clean some things up. And it's been impressive to see those guys come on because Harold Perkins Jr. out for the season. You know, Jacobian Guillory, an important defensive lineman for this LSU team, has been out for the season. So LSU's not exactly whole on the defensive side of the ball right now when you think about playmakers, but it doesn't seem to have impacted the Tigers that much in that regard.
Got another guy who stepped up for that LSU defense is Whit Weeks at the linebacker spot, playing inside for Perkins. I think he's got 2.5 sacks on the year. He's already got 75 tackles on the year, if I'm not mistaken. So he's steaming toward 100. And he's played very well. Georgia native from Watkinsville, Georgia, that one, Travis.
He's played for the Bulldogs, yeah.
Now, I didn't know that.
David Weeks. David Weeks was a center for the Georgia Bulldogs. Played with Kirby, I think. But apparently, you know, the older brother, I think, transferred in to LSU. Mm-hmm. Whit was a guy that I think Georgia liked and really wanted to recruit. But when you got the 2 brothers together going to LSU potentially, that's where I think the Tigers won out.
Sure. Whit Weeks having a good year, especially since Perkins has been out. He stepped it up for the Tigers. The secondary doesn't have the star power back there that we're kind of used to seeing from LSU, Travis. I think Ashton Stamps at corners had a strong year. He's broken up 7 balls, but This is not one of those LSU defenses that's got a first rounder at corner and another first rounder lingering in the middle of the field at safety.
No Stingley back there this year. And it really hasn't been that way for a couple of years. It's been problematic for LSU on the back end, really going back to 2021, 2022. So yeah. I do think it is another area where we've seen improvement with the mass overhaul of that defensive staff after last season. But it's another area where if you're Alabama, especially if you do get the run game going, because Marcel Reed, when he came into the game for Texas A&M a couple of weeks ago in the second half and really ignited that A&M offense against this LSU defense, he did it in large part with his legs, and the threat of the run eventually set up an explosive play for A&M through the air. So that's another reason why you would still like to get this run game going as early as you can, because LSU still isn't at a point personnel-wise where it can kind of just, you know, commit to a balanced approach. They're probably going to have to commit extra guys in some form or fashion. So if you can really get it going with the run game, then I think you have even better opportunities through the air.
Especially with a quick start, and quick starts have been problematic for Alabama at times this season, obviously, Travis. But, you know, if Alabama's offense can take their first possession in this one and hold it together for 8 or 9 plays, he's sticking in the end zone, even with a field goal. And you're obviously field goals in this day and age aren't of the value they used to be because scores are just simply higher. But just from a momentum standpoint, I think it's big for Alabama to do something right out of the gate offensively, hold the ball for a while, stick it in the end zone, get 3, whatever, and put the crowd on its heels just a little bit to get things started.
Yeah, that's why I think perhaps the second half of that A&M game was a real favor to Alabama as well, because you know it's going to be crazy in there Saturday night at kickoff. It always is. You know, when LSU people have all day and the end of the evening to kind of prep for a situation like a home game at night, it's going to be nuts. So if you can go in there and kind of silence that thing a little bit, especially for a team that already has 2 losses, perhaps that proves beneficial. But, Alabama had those opportunities and really did get out to the lead against Tennessee. But I think it's got to be more than just 7 early. I don't think it has to be 10 or 14 in the first quarter. But by the time you get to halftime, obviously you would like a working lead, a manageable lead at that point. And then then it comes down to situational football probably in the second half. And, LSU's had its issues in the kicking game from an operational perspective on field goals. We saw that most recently in their loss to Texas A&M. Brian Kelly swore after that game, Chase, he would get that fixed. So that'll be interesting to watch. But Graham Nicholson, I thought it was encouraging against Missouri to see him just pipe a couple of field goals that weren't exactly chip shots, 39, 40-ish, and then one from 47, because, we've seen this game late come down to some kickers. The last time Alabama went down there, of course, lost the game in overtime. Will Reichard made a big kick late in that game. We've seen Adam Griffith in the 2014 game that ended up in overtime make one to send it to OT. You and I were on the field in 2008 when Lee Tiffin had an opportunity late in that game to make a real difference there. So that's the kind of game I'm expecting. I don't know about you. I'm expecting 4 quarters and this thing to come down to the last possession or so.
I think it'll be tight as well. And you're right. Alabama's, in terms of starts, they did get off to a solid start against Tennessee. As a matter of fact, played well enough in the first half that Neyland was pretty damn quiet in the first half, actually. And obviously got off to a real quick start against Georgia. But then, the start against Vanderbilt, the start against South Carolina, it's been kind of up and down in that regard. But they got a task in front of them for sure down at Tiger Stadium, 6:30 p.m.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
6:30 p.m. Central Time kick on ABC. Travis, I always like to squeeze in that reset for you.
Oh, yeah. The old reset, the Goodbread reset. What's your trust level in this Alabama team going down there at this point?
It's 50. It's not high. I'm not gonna say it's super low either.
Right.
But it's not high.
You're kind of refusing to allow yourself to be surprised, regardless.
First,
that's kind of where I'm at. That's where I'm at.
All right.
Nothing Saturday night is going to surprise me. And I'm not just talking about the outcome. I'm talking play to play, quarter to quarter, possession to possession. I'm going into this thing Saturday night just like,
anything can happen.
I will not be surprised by anything. I'm going on record right now, Goodbread. I will not allow myself to be surprised by anything Saturday night.
2.5-point favorites is the Crimson Tide in this game. Yeah, that surprised me. I thought LSU at least would be a pick 'em at home in this game, but I don't know. I think Alabama still gets a little residual respect from Las Vegas. I think we've talked about this before. I think toward the end of Nick Saban's career, we saw some spreads that were 7 points too high for Alabama's way.
Couldn't get money in.
No doubt.
Money in the other way.
And now I think we're not seeing spreads that are 7 points out of whack with Alabama anymore, but we're still seeing them that are maybe 3 points out of whack. Right? This might be one of them.
Yeah, it might be. I think there is a little bit of probably public concern about the second half LSU that we saw at Texas A&M. I don't know what the splits are on LSU between road and home. I know the 2 games that they've lost this season were away from Tiger Stadium. When you talk about A&M and then the season opener in Vegas, speaking of Vegas, against USC, that's a rough looking. I never would have thought back in August that Alabama's loss to Vanderbilt would have looked better than LSU's loss to USC. I didn't have that on my August bingo card. I don't know.
No, nobody did. Vanderbilt's played the best football since James Franklin this season.
Since Ben Franklin. What are you talking about?
That's right. That's right. It's still remarkable to me that James Franklin won 9 games back to back at that program.
That's pretty much that's pretty much what James does, whether it's Vanderbilt or Penn State. He's going to win 9. Dan Mullen was the same way.
Right.
Dan Mullen, the same guy. Dan Mullen and
Yeah.
James Franklin, same guy. I can win 8 or 9 at Mississippi State, and I'll win 8 or 9 in Florida.
Yeah. It's going to be and Vanderbilt's lost 3 games to date. Is that right? They got 3 L's.
6-3.
They got a tough road to win 9 this year, though. They don't finish easy. They finish tough.
No, even South Carolina for Vandy on Saturday in Nashville is probably going to be a tough game because sort of under the radar, South Carolina's played damn good football on the road this year. Hammered Kentucky, hammered Oklahoma, could have beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa,
Yes. Yeah, they finish off the topic a little bit, but Vanderbilt finishes the season against Tennessee November 30th. The week before that, they got to go on the road. Guess where? Tiger Stadium, LSU, November 23rd.
Don't bet against Diego. Don't bet against Diego.
No, he's taught him that lesson. No doubt about it. Yeah. Travis, Alabama's defense against this LSU offense. Let's hit on that really quickly, and then we'll zip around a couple games in the SEC coming up this weekend. That LSU offensive line is very strong, Travis. They're strong at tackle. They're really experienced across the board. In terms of protection, Garrett Nussmeier's only been sacked 4 times in 8 games, right? Yeah. That tells you all you need to know about the pass. But also, just in terms of how hard it is to get disruption on this offensive line, they've only given up on average 3 TFLs per game this year. That includes your 4 sacks. So it's a tough line to deal with.
It is. They got an injury though. Garrett Dillinger, I think on the interior of that offensive line's out for the foreseeable future. But you're right, and that's why I think this game, the winner might need to be low to mid 30s, just like a couple of years ago. Now that game went to overtime to get there. I don't know if we're going to need overtime Saturday night at Tiger Stadium for the winner to get into the 30s. And, it's still a little bit problematic to think about Nussmeier working against that Alabama secondary if Alabama isn't able to get home on a consistent basis. And I'm at the point with interior types for Alabama, I'm not expecting much in that regard. So that kind of leaves you in a matchup that I think LSU probably feels pretty good about. I love Q Robinson. I love that he has waited his turn. I love that he's had some success this season, but there's not a Dallas Turner. There's not a Will Anderson, right? There's not a Chris Braswell right now on this team. So I don't know. I don't think that Kane Womack is a big fan of bringing 5 or more. But I don't know how you sort of disrupt Nussmeier if you think you're going to get home with 4, because I don't really see it enough on a consistent basis. You talked about the TFL numbers for the LSU offense. Josh Williams isn't a guy that's going to do a lot of bouncing and a lot of dancing, so that's a benefit of him. He's also not going to go 80 against you. Now, he looked like, kind of Kevin Falk against Alabama a couple of years ago down in Baton Rouge. Yeah. But you need to limit that LSU run game. That's the one thing. You're kind of anticipating that Nussmeier's going to throw it around and put some yards up on you. But how can you play in the red zone and keep the run game from giving more than you would like it to for the LSU offense?
Got to stay out of that 3rd and 1. You got to play red zone defense, force those 3-point tries, and you're in business defensively if you're Kane Womack. All right, the Talkin Tide podcast on the Reier on YouTube channel. Appreciate our viewers and listeners joining us. Travis, let's go around the SEC with a look at a few games before we close things out for this evening's program. Georgia at Ole Miss, South Carolina at Vanderbilt. We touched on that a little bit. Florida at Texas. Billy Napier. Let's start with Florida at Texas, given the news that just came out a few hours ago.
Scott Strickland, the AD at Florida, with the
confidence,
with the tweet and hide. That wasn't from a podium or a lectern with media assembled. That was a tweet, and let's go to lunch and come back.
Vote. That's the word I'm looking for,
well,
the vote of confidence.
And Strickland words it as Billy Napier will continue as the Florida football coach. Well, is he continuing for the rest of this week? Is he continuing for the month? Is he continuing in 2025? Look, this was always for Napier going to be tied to DJ Lagway, the outstanding young quarterback down in Gainesville. And so, where I live now, I can tell you, I had to jump in the old car right after that tweet came out. So I put it on the late local sports talk. Oh, no.
They weren't happy?
Oh, I think my dashboard melted, I had to crank the AC up to about 52, But it's not being met favorably by We Are the Boys from old FLORIDA. So it isn't a through all types of weather we'll all stick together, situation right now for the Gator fan base.
And I'm not going to say this. I'm not going to necessarily attach this to Florida, but with the dawn of revenue sharing upon us, Travis, $20 million a year going to athletes starting next year, roughly, and there's still details to be hashed out on that house settlement, et cetera. But with that much money going to athletes, that's basically coming out of TV revenue.
Yeah.
Do you think we're going to see ADs start showing a little bit more patience with these head coaches so they can avoid the buyouts or at least put them off?
Well, it's tough though, isn't it? Because you risk losing donors if you don't make a change. You got donors that I heard today saying, I'm done. I'm not giving the dime to Florida. So if you think that, staying with the coach, not going through the buyout process and making that commitment, and also what you have to pay a new staff to bring in, you, I think, risk losing some people that, might write some checks to you otherwise. Now, maybe that's something Scott Strickland took the temperature of before making that announcement. Look, there's a lot of people out there. I ain't going to write another check. I ain't going to, well, they might not be writing big checks at all, but your whales, I would think you got to have a little bit of a temperature from those folks before you make a move like that, even if it does seemingly guarantee that Lagway is going to come back for 2025.
I would venture a guess, Travis, that most of that angry radio crowd that says I'm done writing checks, they're writing a $19 check every month for the free keychain.
Yeah. They're writing a check for the Nike Polo is what they're, in August. That's what they're writing a check for. I agree.
How about Georgia at Ole Miss, Travis? Does Lane Kiffin have a big win in him? People are wondering.
This Ole Miss, other than Alabama a couple times under Hugh Freeze, does Ole Miss have a really big November win? Not October, not late September, November and later win for Ole Miss. Do the Rebels have it? It's a great question. I think that Ole Miss has to early put Georgia in an uncomfortable situation. And that's when you anticipate Lane and Jackson Dart being at their best, is when they're on that 20 to 25 play script. If they run through that and it's still zip, I think Georgia's lines of scrimmage will still be too much. I think Ole Miss is really pretty legit defensively. Give Pete Golding credit, but more than anything, probably NIL with Walter Nolan coming in there, Trey Amos coming in there, Chris Paul coming in there from Arkansas. They have fortified that defense. It's pretty legit. I think they can hang in a lot better with Georgia up front in that regard than they have in maybe some previous years. So I think you talk about fast starts. I think it's imperative for Ole Miss to get out to one Saturday and then, try to make Carson Beck win the game, which is crazy to say because going into the season, I think a lot of folks thought Carson Beck would be more than capable of winning games like this one, largely on his own. I don't think people feel that way about Carson Beck so much after the 3 interception performance against the Florida Gators, after what we saw in Tuscaloosa too.
I don't think we're going to see much of Ole Miss's punter in this game. I see Lane Kiffin taking his shots on 4th down we've seen it before. Help me remember, was it 2021, Travis, or maybe 2022 when Lane Kiffin tried to pull off like 7 fourth downs against Alabama, and it just went way wrong for him. He only got 1 or 2 of them, I think, maybe converted.
I think that was 21 in Tuscaloosa, because 2020 in Lane's first year, they lit up Alabama in the COVID year. Alabama scored, I think, 63 or something in Oxford, but I think Ole Miss scored 48. It was a wild one over there. So I tend to agree with you. I mean, what does Lane have to lose at this point? Right. It's not like he's auditioning for the Florida job anymore. Doesn't seem like it anyway.
No.
So let it rock. Let it rock, Lane. Let it all hang out Saturday afternoon at Vault Hill.
Let it rip. We'll see if Trey Harris plays. I think he's still questionable. If he can get out there, he'll be out there. They need him.
He's doubtful. And Jordan Watkins, who lit up Arkansas last week, according to the availability report that I saw earlier today, Jordan Watkins is now doubtful.
If Henry
Parrish Jr.'s out at the running back position. So yeah, that's not good for Ole Miss going in this game. That 2.5, that Georgia 2.5 looks better to me than it did maybe a week ago.
If I ranked the SEC coaches 1 through 16 in the order of how much do I trust their level of honesty on injury reports, I'm afraid I might have to put Lane at the bottom.
Lane puts
he's putting half the team on his injury report.
Yeah, I mean it's Lane trolling again. When I look at the Ole Miss availability report, but there has to be some semblance of legitimacy if you're putting guys as out or doubtful. Like
if you're out, you're out.
Yeah, or even if you're doubtful. I mean, I would think there could be repercussions if you put a guy as doubtful and then, he's running a 4.2 on Saturday. But I wouldn't put it past Lane either.
South Carolina at Vanderbilt. We'll wrap it up with that one, Travis. The Gamecocks coming off that big win over Texas A&M really made a statement against the Aggies. Vanderbilt, we've talked about them. Can Vanderbilt get that one done at home? I don't know why they couldn't. South Carolina is obviously coming off a high against A&M, but I don't put this one past Vanderbilt at all.
I don't. Not at this point. Vanderbilt understands exactly who they are. They play pretty clean football. They don't turn the football over. But again, South Carolina's been good on the road to this point. Now, a little bit of a different situation because there's more expectations, it seems like, with South Carolina now coming off that performance against Texas A&M. So we'll see how the Gamecocks handle that. I know Shane Beamer's been kind of beating the little old South Carolina Dabo drum this week in advance of this matchup. Well, Vanderbilt's the team people think is one of the best 25 in the country, and we're not,
Right.
But I think it's going to be a really fun game in that late afternoon window. So you're going to have Georgia and Ole Miss, and then you're going to have South Carolina Vanderbilt, which, another back in August scenario. I don't think I would have been anticipating Vandy, South Carolina, even as much as I am for this week, but Diego Pavia, man, I've said it before. He's ESPN plus All-American material. There's no doubt about it.
That is going to be a wrap for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast. Be sure to subscribe to Reier on YouTube to get Talkin Tide and a whole lot more outstanding content. For Travis Reier, I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News, and we'll talk to you next time right here on Talkin Tide.
Tex Tider, we appreciate you, my man.